right, thank you so much. We're on to our third panel today, which is about technology for our independent future. And we have a couple panelists that came out here from out of state as well. So we have Colin Cantrell come in from Arizona and Amelia Powers from Utah. And I think, is that it? Anybody else? Maybe Brian? Oh, all okay. We're all out of state. So this is a really beautiful group of individuals we have here. We have Colin Cantrell. Brian, please. Brian Talibi. Amelia Powers Gardner. Brian Christensen, SEN, yes. And Brittany Kaiser. Woo. I'm sitting on the opposite end of a panel with Brittany Kaiser. How cool is that? So the catalyst that brought free and equal to the INC and where we are today. So thank you. We're going to make this a really punchy, like fast to the point kind of. Now that I got a mic here on the side, I can jump in but I really want to really kind of jump in right with Colin here. Colin, Nexus Earth expert. Nexus.io. Yes, rebranded, but Nexus.io. And talk to us. Blockchain, voting, blockchain. What do you think about it?
So I started in this whole path, like just a little preface, 2013, crypto. Started with alternative energy technology, just like we got all these problems, let's fix them. So started with hydrogen and so on and so forth, got into crypto. And then, I got into the voting and looking at the reduction. That was one thing that really inspired me, is that we can reduce corruption with blockchain, right? But the more and more I studied it, the more I studied the code, I pretty much rebuilt Bitcoin from the ground up, solved a lot of problems, made a smart contract platform, decentralized web, working on a new operating system, routing protocols, new internet, just everything. It's scrapped, it's bad. It has to be redone. I'll tell you all the stories later, but I spent a lot of time with people that invented the internet. Dino Farinacci, one of them. So I learned all the flaws of it, and the internet is fundamentally broken. He says that it scales because it drops packets, which is very true. Anyway, I will skip all of that. But long story short, I was just like, what's the problem? What's the problem? And it really came down to a human problem, right? So we have social architectures, right? Right now, they're, democracies, which are still kind of like monarchies with votes, right? You vote somebody in, but that person has the ultimate power, and they're still spiders, right? So we're using an analogy for two different types of organizational structures. You have a spider that has a head and it's got 4 legs. You could see that as like the CEO. The legs are like your departments. And so if you chop off a leg, you can't walk, right? You chop off his head, he's dead, right? What we started developing, this was about 4 years ago, and this is from direct contact with corruption. I had to take on vice president of Allergan, like top of pharma. I've had to take on Hollywood goons. I've had to take on into the world, like, hey, dude, you want to stop corruption? Here's corruption. So I studied it, right? And I studied what they did. And I studied their power dynamics. I studied how they greased all the wheels and they do everything. And a lot of that was just a symptom of the conventional social architectures that we have, right? So blockchain voting to me is secondary to the problem, right? It solves one problem, but still, you get somebody in power, they can be corrupted, right? That's one person to corrupt. And that's the problem. It's centralization, right? So we're talking about decentralization. We need to decentralize everything. So getting to the starfish, I've been developing a social architecture that I call a starfish because it's synonymous to a starfish. It's a decentralized organism. I don't know if you guys know, if you chop a starfish in half, it creates 2 starfishes. If you chop a leg off, it walks off and forms a new starfish, right? They had this problem with this spiky starfish in Australia. It was killing all the reefs. They chopped them all in half. They thought they were all, yeah, job well done. And they're like, oh, wait, now there's twice as many starfishes. Whoops. Spiders, you just smash them, they're dead, right? So, when we're talking about taking on corruption, we have the disadvantage because we don't have the media on our side. We don't have these big corporate conglomerates. We don't have the money. But what we do have is we have the ability to create these types of organizations that can't be destroyed, because you chop off a leg, it just goes and joins another starfish, right? Or you chop it in half and it creates another one. So the social architectural element, and then the more I thought about it, the more I started being like, whoa, we have not rethought of this for thousands of years. It's still the same old model, just a little bit repurposed, right? We took the Roman Republic and the Greek democracy, they learned from that, and then they create, this is a republic, right? Sorry, I'll slow this feel. But basically, all of my studying of corruption has kind of come to a point where we need new social code as well as we need blockchain code. We are all synonymous to computers. Our brains work kind of like biocomputers, right? They take programming. We heard about programming, right? So there's certain precedences that are set in the way we interact with one another that we all just take as this is how it is. There's always some guy in charge. There's always a manager, and he's always got his buddies, and that's just how it is. And we have to work within it. People have attempted with social structures like sociocracy, but that still kind of fails. You look at intentional communities, even they're all hierarchical. It always goes around hierarchies around landowners, which is repurposed feudalism. So the fundamental issue here is blockchain voting can augment and create transparent voting systems that allow us to know we accurately elected the individual, but we need to take the power away from the individual. Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts, absolutely. So in order to have true meritocracies and true bottom-up decentralized systems, we need to reimagine the social architectural elements. And that's one of the things that I've worked on for the last 4 years. We've got quite a few deployed. I did a workshop at Anarchapulco, and yeah, it's going. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, so I kind of really wanted to say a question for you. What are the tech solutions that have the greatest implications of better governance?
That's a great question. Look, so where we are right now in Web 3 is exactly where we were in the 90s in Web 2. For those of you guys that are old enough to remember that, right? Because when we were transitioning from Web 1 to Web 2, where we were beginning to use graphic user interfaces, and any organization, whether it's a government or a corporation or an industry, that leveraged Web 2 attained a level of competitive advantage over its competition that was just insane. It was amazing. We're at that place with AI and Web 3. So if you think of whether it's a corporation or an industry or voting or governance, any organization that's able to effectively leverage this emergent tech will experience tailwinds that will make any of their competition basically obsolete. So with AI, we're able to leverage large quantities of data to analyze much better decisions, much more personalized architecture. So if you think about the way that you engage with the world right now, whether it's your social life, what food you order, what entertainment you watch, how you do your job, all of it is personalized to you. Our government has not included any kind of personalization to the way that we share information, the way we analyze data to understand the best solutions to the problems we face. So that's on the AI side. And on the Web3 side, decentralization that enables, as you were talking about, the ability to create an organization that is not just resilient, but anti-fragile. If any of you guys have read Talib's work, an organization that is fragile, obviously when you address pressure to it, it falls. A resilient structure is able to withstand a significant amount of pressure, but eventually still breaks. An anti-fragile organization or structure or government, the more pressure it feels, the stronger it becomes. And so Web3 and decentralization enable us to create government systems and corporations that are anti-fragile and can become more and more powerful.
We can't hear this from the live stream, so you might want to repeat the questions I meant to tell you and who you are. Amelia Powers-Gardner. We have the Utah Commissioner here. Welcome, Amelia. So what have you done? Getting elected? Everything you expected? What have you done?
Oh my goodness. Getting elected has been a crazy experience and journey that I've been on. So about 4 years ago, almost to the day, 4 years ago, I had this crazy voice in my head that said, take a 60% pay cut, leave the private sector, go into government, and learn all the bad things about yourself that you didn't know. So I listened to that little voice in my head and ran for office, was elected, and beat a 3-term incumbent. And when I came into office, the first thing, I wanted to make a big difference. Like, if I'm going to leave the private sector, if I'm going to take a huge pay cut and sacrifice this for my family, why am I doing this? Why did I have that feeling? And it became apparent very quickly to me why. And the reason why I felt that I needed to do this was because someone within government needs to do the decentralization, just like the previous 2 panelists have talked about. If you think about it, how do you prove your identity? You prove your identity with all documents that came from the government, a birth certificate, a marriage certificate, a driver's license, a passport, everything that an institution uses for you to prove who you are comes originally from the government. And as we head into the scary era of ESG and social credit scores and cancel culture, we need to ensure that that same government that gave us these documents can't erase those documents. And the way you do that is with exactly what these two gentlemen talk about, and that is decentralization. So in 2019, when I was sworn into office, I actually launched the first marriage license that is registered on the blockchain. So we launched this in 2019. We went full scale in January of 2020. Everyone thought I was crazy because I had a solution looking for a problem. And then COVID hit, and we promptly processed 20,000 marriage licenses because we were the only people in the country that could issue a marriage license. So that's a big part of it, is getting identity documents on the blockchain. Even if they are issued by the government, once they're on the blockchain, that's an immutable record that can't be erased if they don't like your politics. So I think that's very important. Absolutely. And then, thank you. So that's kind of my big push, is to continue to decentralize government records so that they can't be erased. The second thing that I did is, as a county, formerly, before I was a commissioner, I was a county clerk, and I ran the last election. And so we facilitated the first presidential vote on the blockchain in history. And I do have to say that that vote was cast for Brock Pierce and Carla Ballard. So it came through our county, and we have created an NFT of it. So, but I think that that's really important, because as we go through to look, the best way to root out the corruption in our society is through transparency. The best disinfectant is sunlight, and sunlight is information. And you know, in 2016, we had half the country arguing that that election was corrupt. And then now in 2020, we've flipped, and the other half of the country is arguing that there was corruption in the election because their guy didn't win. And I think what's really important is that whether or not you're happy about who won, if we use this decentralized system, the worst thing that we could do is federalize elections. We really need to implement all of these at the county level. As many of your identity documents, voting documents, as many of the important things need to happen at that local level, which is why instead of jumping in and running for Congress, where you get a lot of, you know, fame and fortune, I ran for a local level, because that's where we really need to implement this. So decentralization is how we've done that, and we've done that through identity and voting.
Paving the way for many more candidates like her to get elected. We got Brian Christensen.
Hello.
Founder of Block Cities. Welcome. Virtual Earth. You're going to upgrade the physical world? How are you going to do that?
That's what we're working on. Yeah. So for a while now, we've been building out a toolkit really for upgrading the planet.
Tell the audience who you are. They didn't hear me on this.
Yeah, Brian Christensen, blockcities.com is the platform that we've built. And you know, basically what we've done is we built a virtual Earth for the purpose of upgrading the physical planet. Okay, right now, thank you. You know, there's a lot going on. Our current trajectory is obviously not sustainable. You know, this is obvious, and so the only way that we're going to be able to reorient that trajectory is by having the tools and collaborating in such a way that we can actually bring outcomes about. Okay. Within that, voting is, you know, a very powerful mechanism. And I would say that within the realm of voting, there's actually an evolution that we'll see in that realm, to where there's actually different hybrids or different types of voting. One of which would be like an actionable voting, which we call quadratic voting. It's a way of being able to propose a solution in the real world in such a way where it's like you put your money where your mouth is, buy a bunch of votes, invite your friends to do the same. Funds are then held in escrow, and then professionals can bid out the completion of this thing that you're actually throwing out there. And so being able to take these more complex, you know, arenas and being able to actually use technology in such a way that can bring about a physical outcome that actually serves us, you know, as a planet, That's really what I'm focused on building. And I feel like at the end of the day, there's a lot of things, if we don't address the root issues, to some of the problems, we can dance around it all day, and so really getting to the root and then being able to have these technologies emerge that serve us, that allow us to bring about the outcomes that we want and that we're capable of bringing about. That's really what I've been focused on building.
So who out there wants to own their own data? Can I get all hands? I think. All right, we got Brittany Keisinger, the founder of Own Your Own Data. Welcome, Brittany. Please say hello.
I'm so happy to be here with all of you guys and see so many beautiful souls all around me. So many of you. It's been a little while, so this is just so beautiful. My name is Brittany Kaiser. I am the co-founder of the Own Your Data Foundation. My co-founder Natalie is here with me, where we teach digital literacy. And I was also the very proud campaign manager of Barack and Carla's presidential run as well, and am an activist in the data protection, privacy, and digital asset and cryptocurrency space. I sit on a number of congressional subcommittees where we work on legislation and regulatory work, specifically helping bridge the gap between what most legislators and politicians know about technology and what the technologists that are building a lot of the cutting edge solutions in this space have to teach them. So I'll help work on and help write and pass the 22 laws that we now have in Wyoming for the blockchain industry, and helped 16 other states and 20 other countries start adopting similar legislation so that we actually have ownership over not just our personal data, but our blockchain tokens, our time, our attention, the value that we produce while using technology. I feel I was supposed to be on the earlier panel. I feel like this is actually the panel I'm supposed to be on, because I spend most of my energy making sure that these cutting edge technologies that solve a lot of the fundamental problems of how our society infrastructure was improperly built. Our societal infrastructure really can be completely reimagined. And I think over the past few years, especially during the coronavirus shutdown, we have seen that our ability to organize and make decisions in a decentralized manner has become greater and really grown at an exponential pace. Where 3 years ago when we started working on the DAO law in Wyoming, it was hypothetical conversations with members of Congress about why a DAO would ever be a better decision-making infrastructure than the way that they currently make decisions in Congress. And that was very special, talking about hypothetical DAOs and getting them to work with us on writing the first DAO LLC law, where explaining decentralized voting and consensus mechanisms and the ability to design away bureaucracy would be a platform of the future that everyone would eventually need to use. And of course, that went into enactment in July 1st of last summer. And that was the first time that we started to see massive DAO projects popping up all over the world and being able to, for instance, fundraise tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in a few days for all people that believe for a certain cause. And I think a great example of that has been what the crypto community has been able to do for Ukraine over the past 2 weeks. We've donated over $200 million, which means that we have surpassed both what the European Union gave in humanitarian aid as well as the United Kingdom. Huge, massive. And so now a sovereign government like Ukraine, which has the highest amount of crypto adoption and where a lot of the biggest crypto platforms and networks that we all know and love have been built by Ukrainians. Now the community has been able to rally around and actually provide decentralized crowdsourced humanitarian aid in larger amounts than most international organizations and governments. So huge for that to be the case and to be able to prove this out at a macro level, which we all thought, we're going to do all these smaller DAO projects and then build up to things. And then for everything from Ukraine DAO to the Ukrainian government opening up 12 different crypto wallets to accept aid directly is just completely amazing. So, I spend as much time as possible as an activist in this space, and working with people like these fine folks. I advise Brian's company, Proud to Work with Ahura, to really make sure that these technologies have universal adoption globally, and that they're specifically designed to protect and empower individual rights. And the more rights that we have, the more ways of protecting them easily, the more we're able to participate and be a great citizen and be a member of society that is engaging at higher levels than just dealing with constant roadblocks and bureaucracy and technology that doesn't work for us. Right now we work for technology. It needs to be the other way around.
Mm-hmm. So we're on the live stream, and I'm going to keep going because no one can hear that. And we've got about 10 minutes left. And, technology for our independent future, I want to say what we're talking about today here is new technological solutions, enable new forms of civic participation and governance. And devoted to improved governance, the independent sector is committed to increasing transparency and accountability of elected representatives, as well as positive civic engagement by the people. So really, that's what we have going on here at this panel. And I want to throw a question out there, whoever wants to answer it. What are the tech solutions that have the greatest implications on better governance? We can keep it to a minute or two, tops.
I think the number one is Web3 and this idea of decentralization. Last week, I was sitting down with United States Senators Rand Paul and Mike Lee from Utah, and both of whom are on the ballot this year. And one of the things they've been fighting since they've been in the United States Senate is there's a presidential directive from the 1930s that would give, in case of an emergency, the president of the United States the ability to shut down communications. Now, that directive was designed to shut down like telephone communications, but it, in theory, could apply to the internet. And so the more that we can decentralize, and not just decentralize, but distribute the internet, which is what Web3 does, would give it the ability so that even if there was a presidential directive, they couldn't do it. Brian and I were talking just the other day, and one of the things he talked about that he's building into Ahura AI is this idea that built into the technology needs to be a lack of control. That needs to be from the ground up. So that if someone comes to cut the head off of that technology, whether it be the internet, whether it be voting, whatever it may be, or cryptocurrency, that when the Canadian government comes in and tries to seize your crypto, if the technology's answer is, we are so sorry, we'd love to do that for you, but we can't. It's the decentralization Web3.
Let me add a couple points to that, because decentralized web is kind of something I've been working on for like 6 years. The physical layer is ultimately the fundamental layer of the internet. You cut the cord, doesn't matter how decentralized your fancy stuff is on top of that, you're not going to get packaged through, right? So the physical layer needs to be recessed. This physical layer needs to be decentralized, right? And then as far as like, the heads, right? Like I'm noticing a lot of decentralized organizations still have corporate structures, typical corporate structures, right? Look at Ethereum. They had the DAO, right? They did the DAO, they raised $100 million, it gets hacked, they fork the chain, right? Well, Vitalik's from Canada. Did you notice that JP Morgan Chase endorses Ethereum right after that happens? So you have a centralized development team that can censor the blockchain. So if Canada does feel like they really want to, there is an option for them to do that, even in an immutable technology, which is a social organizational issue too, right? And that's where there's still heads. All these decentralized systems, they're still ahead. If you look at Bitcoin, the main point of centralization, central point of failure is the development, right? And that also fundamentally comes down to the social architecture in all of that, right? Like there's still heads, and that's why it really, we need to go all the way down to the very base of it, right? The decentralized web is cool, and I see a lot of it where, you got immutable file systems, you got IPFS, decentralized search. We're building all these immutable layers on top of a physical layer that we don't own. We don't own the IP addresses. They can be deallocated. They're actually also rudimentarily stored in routers, so they can be hacked, they can be retraced. I mean, and then there's all these funky protocols on top of like BGP to make it work, because it wasn't really designed for consumer adoption. It was just something that they used on ARPANET in 1969. It evolved into TCP/IP in the 80s, and then they're like, hey, let's commercialize it. And they're like, wait, people aren't going to want to type in numbers. Oh, let's create a domain name system. It was a reactive architectural development. So just at this time, seeing all these problems, we need to fundamentally reimagine everything in order to do it correctly, because we need to augment it to the next level. And that includes everything, right? Like social structures. I know it feels great to be the man and to be the CEO, but like at some point we all need to find ways to not be that. We need to take the heads off of all of it so everything becomes a starfish.
I definitely agree with what both of you have said so far. Decentralization, I think, is a fantastic tool for it. And I think there's a second one, and that the risk of sounding self-serving, I'll say AI-directed learning. Look, our founding fathers spoke about this, that for a democracy to stay healthy, it requires an intelligent, educated, and knowledgeable population. So education is at the foundation for having a healthy country and a healthy world. There was a study recently that just got published a couple months ago that looked at the kids around the world and their ability to understand logic and be able to have a high level of reading comprehension. And what they found is that in the United States, over 90% of high school students cannot differentiate between fact and opinion when they're reading content. Guys, that's a problem. You can't have a healthy democracy if your population can't have basic comprehension and logic. And so education is foundational to enable a healthy society. In fact, Ray Dalio, who runs Bridgewater, the biggest hedge fund in the world, he just wrote a book called Principles for Dealing with a Changing World Order. He had his people study all of the variables that determine the rise and fall of civilizations and empires. And of the 18 variables that they deciphered, education is the first one that will determine the fall of a country.
I just want to add one thing too, really quick.
2 minutes left. So.
2 minutes. Okay, it's just gonna be
For the whole panel.
the founding fathers said that our country and our constitution is designed for religious and moral and just people, which they are correct, but it wasn't designed for a malicious world that we live in right now. And so that's one thing that's just a design flaw of the United States, is it's designed for people have to be good, but we have to assume that people are not going to be good when we're designing the system. You just brought that to my thought. I just had to add that. Sorry.
Thank you. All right, this one's for you, Brittany, Brian. We're going to be wrapping up here in just one minute. So Brittany, Brian, and really just like what are developmental elements around the technologies you see our independent movement must get right culturally? Please.
So one of the things that's important is, and it's pretty basic, but intuitive design. You know, one of the things is the less intuitive things are, the more education is required in order to be able to understand how to utilize this app. So having obviously the usefulness to the thing that you're designing, but then also a very intuitive design that just takes the user naturally to the end objective, you know, that you're bringing them to. You know, but taking a step back a little bit, you know, there's a lot of different things that we can focus on. There's a very powerful story that I heard that actually based my entire company off of over the last little bit, which is a guy by the name of Carl Rodenhamel back in the day. And it was the very first example of a real world distributed ledger system that happened right after the Great Depression. And basically it was just a little point system where people could work and then they got their points and then they could spend their points within the system and spend it on healthcare, automotive, you know, nursery, whatever it was. But being able to actually take your time and human energy and then be able to spend it in other ways as a result of earning something, it's collaboration at its finest. And unless we develop these technologies that allow for more efficient collaboration together, you know, nothing else really matters.
You know, Brittany, I'm going to spin the question here real quick. What sort of technology do we need to have, and we need to repeat it from the live stream, you know, in order to elect independent candidates or an independent presidential candidate 2024, 2028 vice presidential as well?
Absolutely. So I think really, yeah. And so it's what are the most important technologies that we should be using to actually be able to elect more independent candidates and eventually look to be able to get an independent president in the White House, which I think a lot of us have asked ourselves this question and been working hard to see that goal eventually materialize. And what we do know is that the majority of this country is independent because most people have even opted out of the system, right? They do not vote for Democrats or Republicans, the majority of us in this country. So I'm going to combine a few of the things that were said in answer to, you know, what are the best technologies that we need to be using. And that's both education, so that people understand that they have access to these types of candidates. You have to be educated in order to understand why there are certain people with certain beliefs that are actually looking out for empowering individuals and protecting people's rights. That requires a level of education. But we also need to be providing people with that basic access. We've talked about universal earned income. We've talked about well-designed, easy-to-use apps, so you don't need to be very technical in order to get access. If everyone had a universal earned income and was able to follow their passion and have time for education, then I think all of these people that are not currently even participating in the political system would be coming in and they would be voting independent because they've already proven that they refuse to vote for Republicans or for Democrats. And so some of the most important technologies that exist right now are starting to come out all over the crypto space, which is being able to earn an income for owning your data, your time, your attention, and that just by participating in a community, by opening an app, all of a sudden you're earning enough money every single day to at least buy groceries with, to take care of yourself and your family, your basic needs, meet your basic human rights, and then you can concentrate on everything else. So I really think it's the universal earned income, staking, airdrops, apps that make that easy for anyone to go and earn enough money to protect their own human rights. And that is going to be the most revolutionary part of the use cases of these technologies. And once people take care of those rights, then we can think about voting on DAOs, voting for independent candidates, et cetera, and so forth. But let's make sure everyone's basic needs and human rights are met so that we can see that type of evolution.
Thank you. All right, so we're wrapping up the panel. So this is our panel on technology for independent future. Thank you so much. I do have to take a moment to flag one paragraph. Is that free equal elections is in the process of launching our blockchain elections is an app powered by Nexus.io. It's designed to promote transparency in the U.S. electoral process, inspire individuals to run for office, empower voters with information about the electoral system, and educate them all about their candidate voices. So this will launch into our presidential race in 2024. So thank you, Colin, for speaking.
Yeah. And to add a little too, that it leads into the DAO. We're talking about uniting independence, right? So let's think differently, right? We can't solve the problem with the same problem of thinking, so we need to think differently. So as we go away from this, start thinking about those types of things. How can we organize things differently? Like one quick example, we vote. We have a DAO in my family. My kids vote the rules. Try it. It works. It changes everything. Yeah. Just think differently. Sorry. Don't mean to. Love you guys. Give it to Nash.